Before we get started, you should all know that this review is brought to you at the request of Shockblade from the Lazy Eyebrow Reviewers Discord server. If you'd like to request the subject of a future episode of It Figures, please don't. I don't want to get into the habit of handing out reviews for free because that is an unrealistic expectation.
Also, special thank you to everyone who applied to voice G1 Shockwave in this video.
Read the disclaimer. Doofus. And please contact us through this email address with questions or fan art. Thank you for your support.
Of this series, I've used a lot of collector-specific terminology and also tried to explain it to my audience to the best of my ability. These terms have included grails and repaints. But there is one concept that I think I should probably address by this point. The shelf warmer. A shelf warmer is basically a figure that never leaves the shelves and keeps the metaphorical benches warm for the next batch of figures. And more specifically, a shelf warmer that I am utterly baffled by. Not because of, well, its quality, but more because it's been on the shelves for over a year at this point. In fact, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find this figure on shelves right now in some locations. Salutations, denizens of the internet. I'm Firebite27, and let us commence our analysis of Transformers War for Cybertron Siege Shockwave. Oh, crud, I'm holding this thing the wrong way up. There we go.
When it comes to the period of time between when I acquire a figure and when I choose to review it, there are a multitude of factors that will impact how delayed it gets. Some figures I may be saving for a specific holiday, or I'll be saving them for a specific milestone review. There are also figures that I already feel I've discussed because I've already covered their base mold, and then there are those that decide to break on me less than 24 hours after I've acquired them, so I have to hunt down another copy and end up overpaying, despite the fact that literally the next day after I buy them, the price goes back down to retail price. Never mind, that's not important right now. And then there are figures that I wait for months on end to review because, I guess I'm busy with other stuff?
Play the forbidden note!
Anyways, in his vehicle mode, Shockwave turns into a submarine, and while yes, I do acknowledge that this could technically be a spaceship, I think it just looks more like a submarine. Feel free to leave an angry comment explaining why my opinion is wrong, but you will be wasting your time since I will be trying to delete your comment within 3 hours of its posting.
I mean, if you're turned off by this alternate mode change, I totally get it, but I prefer the submarine interpretation for a few reasons. First off, while it does have a handle that could be used for a gun mode, it's a bit too small for me to hold comfortably. Then we have my second problem. Why is Mr. Reasonable and Logical turning into a fucking gun?
Alternate modes like this always beg 3 questions. Firstly, what advantage are you gaining in exchange for the mobility that an alt mode would provide? Second, how will you get around the battlefield? And finally, can you describe your mode of transportation as reliable? In my humble opinion, the answers in Shockwave's case are basically none, based on Megatron's track record, probably Starscream, and of course, yes, depending on how far you want your alt mode punted across the battlefield. Surely someone who's as much of a thinker as Shockwave would have considered all of these, hence the change from a gun to a submarine. There's also another argument that can be made that's super logical and that I can see Shockwave using to justify his alt mode, and that is, well, the Decepticons don't really have a naval fleet. I mean, just pick 11 Decepticons at random and I will guarantee you, 5 of them will have flight-based alt modes, 3 of them will have car-based alt modes, 2 of them will be animals, and the last one might have been a little too indecisive about their alt mode. Or you'll have someone like Shockwave, Megatron, or Soundwave that chose to turn into an item instead of a vehicle. Quite frankly, I think someone like Shockwave would take a look at all of the jets in the Decepticon army and say, okay, I think we're reinforced enough on that front, and decide to take a sea-based alternate mode. But whatever you want to call this vehicle, the unfortunate truth is that it's a wee bit gappy. The gaps are most prominent towards the middle and back of the vehicle mode, which is unfortunate because they ruin the cohesion of this vehicle mode completely. But that's not exactly to say like there was a lot of cohesion to begin with, especially with this cord hanging off the side for some reason. Now then, according to the instructions, you're supposed to have it hanging off of the tower here, which coincidentally also happens to have light piping. But, and forgive me for saying this, that just looks stupid. I mean, call me a heretic if you must by saying this, but I think it would have been better if the cable just parts formed instead of being stapled onto the back. And in general, I just kind of find this alt mode boring. There's nothing unique about it, and nothing that really sets it apart from other versions of Shockwave. Or Shock Blast, depending on the trademark status. And what I feel ultimately hurts this vehicle mode the most is the fact that it's kind of monochromatic. Like, don't get me wrong, Shockwave is famously only 2 colors, that being gray and purple, but it feels as though the purple isn't broken up enough by the gray/silver. Every Shockwave design that's based off of the G1 character, from the Cyberverse version to the animated version to even Micron Legends Shockwave, has more color breakup than this. Even DOTM Shockwave had better color breakup than this. And honestly, if your G1 design is less comprehensible than your Bayverse design, that's a pretty good sign that the designers screwed up. Also, the eye on the bridge isn't blast effect compatible, not really a deal breaker, but a really unfortunate missed opportunity. Honestly, the only thing I get out of this figure, at least in this mode, is that it's just sort of an undefined long purple rectangular prism. But like I said, it is pretty long, so let's do size comparisons. Here's Leader Class Shockwave next to my last review, Reveal the Shield Special Ops Jazz, the last Leader Class figure I reviewed, Studio Series Grimlock, the last Siege figure I reviewed on this channel, Astro Train, my next review, Kingdom Air Razor, Kingdom Cyclonus, and of course a standard Kutama, standard can of sparkling water, and Broadside. So overall, Shockwave's base Submarine mode is kinda boring, and I can't really say that it has any reason to exist. Nor can I say that it justifies the leader price point on its own, which is why it comes with a bunch of accessories, which we're going to get into right now. Shockwave, transform.
I'd like to be under the sea, in an octopus's garden, in the shade.
Now then, I love this alternate mode. It's an upgrade to the original one in every single way, being more distinct from the upside down gun mode, and, well, just cooler with more color breakup. It's a big ass battleship ready to provide backup to any Decepticon fleet needing it. And I love it, despite the fact that it really doesn't match up with Shockwave's personality. Unfortunately, there's still not enough color breakup present to make this alt mode feel truly distinctive, but I'll allow it. Besides, the lack of color separation combined with the amazing amount of sculpted detail really reminds me of a Star Destroyer, even though I'm not really a massive fan of Star Wars. I mean, even in general, it just kinda reminds me of a Star Destroyer on an acid trip, which, again, I'm totally okay with, since the Star Destroyer is one of my favorite spaceships from the entire franchise. Even in spite of the fact that I find it nearly impossible to get invested in Star Wars in the first place. And now that he has so many guns attached to his alt mode, I'm pretty sure he'll be able to sink an entire fleet of Star Destroyers. Can you sink a Star Destroyer? They're technically a spaceship, which means they float through space. No, that's not worth questioning. Now, unfortunately, I don't have much else to add to what I said in the previous version of this vehicle mode, apart from the fact that getting some of these armor pieces on is rather difficult. The first part that's hard to attach is the front, with these turrets and the giant eye cannon. They're difficult to attach because of a pair of pegs that need to go into some slots on the side that are just underneath Shockwave's arms, and they are nearly impossible to line up. However, the real problem children here are the wings. There are 2 ports on each wing that are supposed to plug into the shoulder pad, one for the blast effect nub, and one for the 5mm post. However, the one for the blast effect nub is particularly ornery and does not like to stay in. And I will say, he does feel a bit more spaceshipy in this vehicle mode than he did in his previous mode. Oh, also, this vehicle mode takes up more space than the other one, so let's do our size comparisons. Here's a Shockwave next to Jazz, Grimlock, Astro Train, Air Razor, Cyclonus, a standard Qtama, a standard can of sparkling water, and Fraudside. So overall, I do really like this vehicle mode more than the core vehicle mode, but I kind of have a lot of trouble finding stuff to say about it. So yeah, that's where I'm just gonna end it. I really like it, and it's cool. Now then, let's fire up another Beatles song and get to the robot mode.
In the town where I was born, lived a man who sailed the sea.
Much like the rest of the Siege figures released around the same time as himself, Shockwave is, well, his G1 robot mode with a bunch of extra details. Hell, even his eye is surrounded by elaborate details. But even in spite of this, the spirit of Shockwave's character is preserved in this figure. Like the instant I see this figure, I think Shockwave, the Cybertronian who will prove once and for all that Decepticon logic is the finest in the world! And I think a big part of that is the light-piped eye. It's so spectral and spooky. Although tragically, even the slightest obstruction is enough to turn off the light piping entirely. But even after all that, I'm still glad that it's here. Now for my complaints, the first of which will come across as absolutely blasphemous to G1ers, but I really, genuinely wish that they had made this cable a parts-forming piece. Not just because it messes with the cohesion of the vehicle mode, but also because of the placement of the weapon ports on the backpack would feasibly allow both ends of the cord to tab into the proper spots. Not to mention that it would basically eradicate the need to find a place to shove the cord into in the other modes. Also, why did Shockwave need a blast effect nub placed on one side of his waist? This is literally the only blast effect nub on the figure that has an asymmetrical placement. Literally everything else is symmetrical on this figure. Then again, Shockwave's left arm looks like a gas pump, so I really have no right to complain about symmetry. Also, I feel the need to reiterate that the eye has no blast effect compatibility. Come on, Hasbro, this would have been comedic gold! Oh, and while I should mention that I very much am your average Siege battle damage enjoyer, I find the battle damage on Shockwave to be weak, to say the least. They tried using black on silver to mirror the effect of scorch marks or scratches, but instead it comes across as black plastic that wasn't properly painted. Fortunately though, none of these issues interfere with the core of the figure, and its articulation, which is quite good.
In robot mode, Shockwave has a ball joint at his head, universal joints at his shoulders, hinge joints to shrug his shoulder, rotating joints at his biceps, hinges at his elbows, rotating wrists, rotating waist, universal hips, knees, and ankle pivots.
So overall, the articulation is right around average for the War for Cybertron trilogy. He has a satisfactory number of joints and a serviceable range of motion that allow him to get into a wide variety of poses. Although some of these poses will be a bit too lively for a guy who has the same range of emotions as a text-to-speech program. But for a leader, he feels especially stout. Like, even among the Voyager masquerading as leader class genre, he still feels a bit short. So, let's do those size comparisons. Here's a Shockwave in robot mode next to Jazz, Grimlock, Astro Train, Air Razor, Cyclonus, a standard Qtama, a standard can of sparkling water, and Fraudside. So in conclusion, I think that wraps up my thoughts on Siege Shockwave's core robot mode pretty well. It's well articulated, well detailed, and it's honestly one of the best Siege figures around. But before we get to the good bit, we should probably talk about the most boring thing that these pieces of armor do, and that is the hoverboard mode. Now then, unlike the majority of the transformations in this show, I will not be speeding this up since the instructions don't walk you through it. So anyways, the first step is returning the front of the battleship mode to its configuration from the vehicle mode. However, it needs to be upside down so the turrets are on the bottom. Next thing you're going to want to do is take these wingtips from the vehicle mode and fold those actual wingtips underneath, so they fill out the void like that. You will also notice that there are tabs on the side of these parts, as well as parts on the bottom. These are so they can connect together with the segment and each other in order to form the top of the hoverboard. And finally, take the gun emplacements / additional thrusters from the vehicle mode and just plop them onto the side here. And that's the entire transformation for the hoverboard. Honestly, I don't know why this was included. It's stupid, and frankly, I think that the instructions were right to omit it. The thrusters are really fond of popping off, and I cannot think of a single situation where this looks cool. But at least it's better than RC's hoverboard, I'll tell you that much. Okay, now that we're done with that useless addition, let's get on to the main point of the armor. Shockwave, power up! So, I'm kind of at a loss of words right now, not because this is awful, but because this is one of the coolest things I've seen in my life. Like, whenever I see figures combining like this, I'm immediately taken back to 4th and 5th grade when I really got into Power Rangers. Which was the first time in my life that I can recall being embarrassingly over-obsessed with a particular franchise. This design's Super Sentai Mecha power-up energy is strong, with all the spikes, wings, additional guns, and of course the big-ass backpack. But that's just from the front. In the back we have a bunch of flaps here that for some reason remind me of Jotaro Kujo's jacket when they're splayed out. I have no idea why. It's just a mood that I get from this figure. The armor in general also really reminds me of the Power Loader from the Aliens movie. Probably because I see Shockwave using this more for utility than combat, though the utility present in giving a scientist an additional pair of arms with laser blasters when he already has an arm with a laser blaster on it is a bit of a head-scratcher to say the least. Seriously, there is nothing logical in a scientist equipping himself with more firepower. Oh, also, did they have it to make the hands and arm cannons lilac? Now, I know MP29 did this. However, here's the difference between Siege Shockwave and Masterpiece Shockwave. The MP was based off of the show model, which meant that it was a much lighter shade of purple because, well, Shockwave in the cartoon was a much brighter shade of purple than he was in the toy. Well, most of the time anyway. Now, like I said, on a figure with a brighter shade of purple for the majority of the body, the lilac would actually look pretty good. However, this is not that shade of purple. This is a velvety purple, almost bordering on an indigo or eggplant purple. Unfortunately, the armor doesn't really bring much new to the table besides those things. And unfortunately, at full cynicism mode, I have to say that really, this only bulks up his silhouette and also just bumps out the price to $50. Nothing more, nothing less. Oh, and I guess giving him an artificial height increase like Astro Train. But unlike Astro Train, this is actually somewhat unique. And unlike Earthrise Optimus Prime, it's not a total ripoff. And with regards to the articulation, well...
Articulation is literally identical to the core robot mode but with an additional pair of arms hanging off of the shoulders.
Yeah, that. Anyways, before I wrap this up, I should say that this mode doesn't have much of a height difference from his original robot mode. But it does feel a bit bigger because it's so bulky and wider. And in this mode, I feel as though it has the genuine feel of a leader class figure. Anyways, here's Power Up Shockwave next to Jazz, Grimlock, Astro Train, Air Razor, Cyclonus, a standard Qtama, a standard can of sparkling water, and Broadside. So overall, I'd have to say that I really genuinely like the idea and execution of this figure. I'm honestly hoping that they do more leader class combiners like this in the future. Like, imagine an Energon Optimus done in this style. That would be nuts. Or, you know, considering he has a trailer that could be used for the Commander class. Rodimus Prime?
So overall, I'd say that Shockwave is probably one of the most underrated Transformers figures to ever have come out of the War for Cybertron trilogy. I'm being fully serious. This was a solid proof of concept that the leader class could just be a price point and not a set strict rule book about points of articulation, plastic quantity, etc., etc. In all honesty, I don't get why this thing is a shell former. I mean, I get it, it's expensive, but I think that they genuinely did a good job of just packaging a Voyager in a box and also adding on a weaponizer and bumping up the cost accordingly. And while I would like to see size classes done away with altogether because I think it's a bit too restrictive on the pricing and it makes things more confusing for grannies, can't deny that this is actually kinda awesome. It's a gun, it's a boat, it's a submarine, it's whatever you want it to be. And just the fact that it also has light piping in all three modes is pretty amazing to me. So overall, I'm gonna have to say that this figure scores a 10 out of 10 for me. Not a very common score, but still, this thing is good. And for once in your life, you may actually be able to find it on store shelves still. I mean, this thing is shelf-warmed hard. I got mine last year, and from what I remember, there were still a few copies of it at Target the last time I checked. So, go out there and get this figure immediately. You might actually find it at a good price. But with that being said, this is Firebyte27 over and out.